Night Vision Astronomy with special guest Dale Eason on episode 295 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We are amateur astronomers who love looking up at the night sky, and today we are discussing night vision astronomy. Welcome to the show, Dale.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and before we go too far, I have to give a shout out of thanks to Howard Banich, who answered our call for a night vision astronomy guest, and he connected us today. And so just want to say it's a pleasure to have you on the show with us this afternoon, Dale.
Okay, I'm glad to be here and hope I can provide some interesting information about what night vision is and how you use it.
Sounds good. So just as I was preparing for the show today, I put on my investigative journalist hat, and I was actually talking to I think another person, who's Peter Becure. I think he's on one of the ATM lists with you. And Peter was telling me about some of your astronomy software that you've created for mirror testing, and your SkySolve application, and then as well, Howard and somebody else was telling me about your Cloudy Nights contributions as somebody who frequently posts about night vision, and as somebody who follows the ATM stuff. I'd already seen the video of your 10-inch f3 collapsible Dobsonian, so you've really got a lot of different irons in the fire when it comes to astronomy. It's going to be a really neat conversation today, I think.
Yes, I have enjoyed doing interferometry, testing mirrors, and writing software to do that, as well as making various telescopes.
Excellent. So, as we sort of discussed in our pre-show conversation, and so that the listeners know, Shane and I have absolutely no experience with night vision astronomy or using night vision to do astronomy. And sometimes this is referred to simply as, but by the letters NV astronomy. And so we are really starting as like beginners on this today. So with that, Dale, just going to ask you a get and going question, which is basically what is night vision astronomy? Can you just give us like a basic introduction to this topic?
Sure. So night vision astronomy starts with a night vision device, which is a device that the Army uses to see at night. And they work pretty much like a finder scope or binoculars. And they have a lens on one end, a light amplifier in the middle, and then a lens on the other end that you look through, much just like binoculars. And so you can use them because they amplify the light about 64,000 times. You can use them to see very dim things up in the sky, and you can use them three ways for astronomy. One way is you can just hand hold them at night and look up at the sky through them just like a telescope or binoculars, and you can put various kinds of filters on the front end, and that's how I use it a lot, because I live in Bortle 7 to Bortle 8 skies, and you can put filters that will filter out that city starlight or city light pollution, and that takes out quite a bit of the starlight as well. But because it's amplified 64,000 times, there's still enough light left in there for you to see something. And you actually, in my location where visually I can't see the Milky Way, when I put that up to the sky, and we have nice transparent skies. Here I live in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and we don't often have transparent skies like that. But using that, I actually see the Milky Way from my suburban backyard. The other way to use it is to have it look into the telescope, just like a camera, except that you look through its eyepiece and it shows you a live view vision through the telescope. And we call that prime focus night vision, just like you would put a camera into a telescope's eyepiece holder. or a focuser. The third way, which is actually the way I use it in my Dobsonians, is to put a regular eyepiece in the telescope and then have it look into the eyepiece, just like you might put a cell phone camera up to the eyepiece, except there's an attachment that makes it easy to hold it onto that eyepiece. And then you look into the night vision device again, just like an eyepiece, and you see a live view. You see a live view there.
So Dale, I'm curious now that you've said that there's three ways to do it. It's kind of like handheld, and you can look at it through a telescope. But why is your preferred method to use it in the telescope on top of an eyepiece?
In my telescope, in typical Dobsonian, they have a hard time focusing a camera because the camera's focal plane is so far back, you can't drive your focuser in far enough to get it to focus. And then if you change your telescope so that'll happen, when you put your normal eyepieces in, they won't focus. So typically Dobsonians have that problem. Refractors have a lot larger focus, and you can use the night vision in prime mode better for that. However, prime gives you a higher magnification than when you look through an eyepiece.
Oh.
And a lot of the night vision things we look at up in the sky actually are very large, several degrees in diameter. And so it's nice to get a big full view of them. And afocal looking through an eyepiece helps you do that.
Yeah, I was really interested because we were chatting back and forth. You went back and listened to an interview we did with Sky and Telescope author Brian Ventrudo back in December, and you picked up on the fact that I enjoy quite a bit doing wide field visual observing of things like Barnard's Loop or the North American Nebula and such. And so you were kind enough to send along some of these images, which were pretty spectacular. How did you go about taking those images? Do you just hold your cell phone up to the sort of to the, what is it, like an eyepiece lens that's
yes, it has an eyepiece just on the end of it, just like binoculars do, or any small telescope has.
Yeah.
And it even has a little focus adjustment so that nearsighted people can see it as well as far-sighted people. So it works just like I said, just like binoculars on the back end of it. And yes, I put up my Android phone looking right into it. And, that's kind of hard to do handheld. It jiggles around if you've ever tried to do that with a telescope. But you can occasionally then get it right in the center and have it snap a picture. And it only takes 1 to 2 seconds of exposure for the modern cell phone cameras. And I don't have an iPhone one, but I have an old Android of about 5 years old. And those pictures I showed you were taken with that camera. However, I also bought an adapter that will hold the camera right up against the eyepiece of the night vision device. I don't use it that way very much because out there in the dark and on the concrete sidewalk, I hate to drop my camera or drop my cell phone onto the sidewalk, and the adapter isn't that great.
Yeah.
Dale, so the photograph that I'm looking at right now that you sent is phenomenal. I'm just curious about the color. Does night vision impart any artificial color? It appears to me that it's just sort of gray, tones of gray, black, and brighter, sort of white tones, I guess, for the stars. Is that how it typically views, or is there other colors involved?
Well, there are 2 types of phosphors that you can buy a night vision device in. One is very green, and the other they call white or white phosphor. But if you actually hold it up to your eye, you see a bit of green as well. The gray image you're looking at is I actually went into Photoshop and turned it with monochrome gray just so it wouldn't bother people so much being green. A lot of people don't like the green. The reality is, when you put it up to your eye, within about 4 or 5 seconds, your brain changes it and it doesn't see the green anymore. It just sees a monochrome image. It's just amazing how that works. And then if
Really?
you start thinking, oh, I was looking at a green image, it might turn green again. But mostly you don't notice it at all. It just is a monochrome image.
Wow, that's fantastic. And the image that the night vision produces, like I remember looking at somebody that was using a Malin cam a number of years ago. And so the Malin cam is on the telescope, and they had a screen set up, and you watch the screen, and over time the image built as the Malin cam, I think, did some stacking or something like that of the images. And then within a few minutes you had like a great view of, say, M42 or something like that. With night vision, I think it's like real time, right? Like there's no building of an image or anything like that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And when I'm using it, you slide the telescope around, you get a little smearing, but you don't really notice that much. And you can actually watch an airplane fly through the view, or I've watched meteors fly through the view. In fact, in the late fall of last year, we had a nice meteor shower, and I was here. I couldn't see them visually, but when I just had it handheld and was looking up at the sky, I saw meteors fly through the image about once per minute, and that was a fun thing, something I hadn't realized would be so nice. Also, when I have it hooked up to my telescope, and in the early evening, I see probably a satellite per every image about every minute. I'm really kind of disappointed about how many satellites there are flying through there. And of course, they're putting up more now, but that's another story.
Yeah. That's very interesting.
I gotta ask a couple questions about like how this works and like compared to regular stuff. Now that we're chatting, we did all this back and forth leading up to this because like I said, neither Shane or I know much about it, but now that we're actually talking, I have better questions, I think. So like, I'm curious, one of the things I noticed in your photos is it looks like you put an eyepiece in just like a regular eyepiece. And then you put this night vision. It's like a long cylindrical thing. It looks almost like a long, thick Barlow on top of the eyepiece. So it sticks out pretty far. Do I have that arrangement right before I ask my follow-up question?
Yes, that arrangement is right. You get a pretty tall stack. The night vision device itself, you have an adapter that will screw it onto various lenses that have diopter settings in them. Teleview has kind of a little ridge around their eyepieces where you could put a diopter adapter on them, and this makes use of that. And it has a friction fit that you attach the night vision device to, and then attach it to the eyepiece by screwing it on. Then and so to begin with, the pictures you see, I have a 55 millimeter Teleview eyepiece in my 10-inch f3 telescope focuser. So that eyepiece itself was rather big and long. And then you end up with the adapter, and then you have a night vision device down at the end of it. And the night vision device itself is about as long as, let's say, 8 by 50 binocular is long.
Yeah.
So it's actually rather short device, but it's at least as long as a 55 millimeter Teleview eyepiece.
Yeah.
So you get a big stack there, and it can cause weight problems. Their telescope wants to move around with that big stack hanging out the end, but I've learned to live with it and rebalance the telescope.
So when you have that, you look into it just like a regular eyepiece, though, correct?
Yes, you just bend down and look into it.
Okay. So, and I noticed like both Shane and I wear glasses. I have to wear glasses to observe. I noticed you're a person who also wears glasses. But can you wear glasses when you look in the night vision device? Should you take them off? Does it matter? Is there any difference at all over using a regular eyepiece?
I've used it both ways. The night vision device itself has a focuser that will focus to any of your eye deformities, or short nearsightedness and longsightedness. and you can also use it with glasses. The night vision device is a little bit different from an eyepiece, where an eyepiece has, what do they call it? High relief. That's it.
Yep.
Okay, so normally eyepieces have an eye relief that's listed, and for some of them, we with glasses have to take our glasses off to get a close enough view.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing about the night vision device is it's basically has a lens, but it's like a lens looking over a television screen, and it's actually a collimated view, meaning that it has no eye relief. It's an infinite eye relief that it has. That means you can actually back up and be a foot away and still see everything in that eyepiece. Now, of course, it looks smaller to you because you've backed up so far, but you actually see it all.
Okay.
But you really don't look at it that way. But that means that if you have glasses, you can use your glasses if you want, or you can take them off. And I do it both ways.
Huh. Okay. All right. And then the other thing I have to ask, and I don't think I put this in the notes either, was you described this as being something like, I don't know, like, was it, am I right? Like 64,000 times?
Yes, it amplifies the light 64,000 times. That's a huge amount of light amp.
So then I was surprised, because here in our conversation now, you mentioned like looking at airplane, looking at meteor. So, I mean, sometimes like airplane lights can be pretty bright, or a meteor can be bright. Does that brightness kind of like overwhelm your eye or ruin your night vision? Or is it much like you said, like looking at a TV screen where, yeah, sure, you can point a TV camera at a bright object, but the TV itself is only going to go so bright and not like really overwhelm your eye? Or how does that work in relation to night vision? If you look at something really bright, or like if a car went by and the lights kind of shone on your telescope a bit, would it like super blind you, or is it just like looking at a bright TV screen kind of thing?
Well, that's a lot of questions there, so I'm going to try
Sorry.
each one. First of all, night vision devices have either an automatic gain on them or a manual knob gain. Mine has automatic gain on it, and so when it sees something really bright, it shuts its gain down, and so you aren't blinded by that.
Okay.
And in reality, airplane lights are really, really dim.
Okay.
Now, I had never thought about it before. Perhaps they would be brighter if I didn't have auto gain, but no, they aren't too bright. And then the second question about night vision is, will it be ruined by a bright light? Well, it turns out it's ruined by the night vision device itself. It's actually very bright. I haven't had it out at a dark site to understand how much it really ruins. Here in my driveway, I've got lights all around, so I don't get good night vision in the first place.
Okay.
In general, when you're using night vision, you may not switch back and forth. I just don't know. I haven't been out at a dark site. But what I have discovered is it doesn't ruin your night vision like looking at a really bright white light. It's more like looking at a really bright red light, and your night vision recovers much faster from that kind of thing. And from what little I've used and experienced, I found the night vision released returns quickly to me, at least the night vision I have from my driveway.
Yeah.
Which I have neighbors' lights right across the street from me, and down I have a street light right half a block away from me. And we haven't talked about it yet, but it's kind of interesting. Even in a full moon, the night vision device works, where you normally, us people who like really dark sights, wouldn't go out on a new moon. I can go out with my night vision and look 10 degrees away from the moon, and I can find just about anything I want there, just as if the moon wasn't there. Just depends on how much the moon is lighting up the night air pollution that I have.
So this is incredible. This really is
just like, I got to start writing notes here.
I know this is blowing my mind, actually. So Dale, I think we'll get into the equipment that's required for NV observing here in a little bit. You mentioned you use a 55 millimeter Teleview Plossl. Do you swap eyepieces throughout the night, or is it you put the 55 millimeter in, you attach the night vision, and then that's it? You just kind of observe that way? Or is there any is there any sort of benefit to swapping eyepieces?
Yes, there is, and I do swap, although it's a bit of pain to do that in the dark, and we haven't talked about it yet, but that's an expensive device to drop on the concrete. And so
Yeah.
I have a lanyard on it that I have wrapped around things to keep it from happening. But also, when you swap, and we haven't talked anything about it yet, the real part of night vision is using different filters to get the best, to get the light pollution out. But you have to use several different filters, one for seeing hydrogen alpha things and one for seeing stars. And so when you swap an eyepiece, I usually have the filter down inside the eyepiece at the end of it, the 2-inch filter. And so first of all, you have to take the night vision and unscrew it from the eyepiece. Then you pull the eyepiece out, take the filter off, attach it to the other eyepiece you want to use, put the night vision device, screw that back onto the new eyepiece, put that all back into the telescope and go, oh, well, where was my object? I don't have tracking. And I just went to a higher power. What am I going to do? How do I find that? And so I tend not to do that a lot, except when I really want a higher view. But the problem is a higher magnification means it's going to be dimmer, and it might be too dim then, even with the 64,000 view. And now the night vision might start scintillating because it doesn't see enough light. And so there is a limit of
so sort of
how much magnification you use. But sometimes I go all the way up to a 10 millimeter eyepiece, up from the 55 millimeter.
Okay, so there's still sort of an exit pupil factor maybe to consider here, except it's probably not exit pupil. It's some sort of night vision impact. But that's very interesting because, as I'm starting to do some mathematics in my head about the cost of night vision and, thinking, well, if I was able to sell all of my eyepieces and not have to worry about having a case full of those, maybe this could work. But very, very, very interesting. Maybe we should just get into the gear. What do you think? What is all involved to make night vision work on a telescope?
Well, we could talk about that, but we actually haven't talked about what night vision does.
Okay.
And I think that's better to talk about first.
Sounds good.
If you hear how expensive it is, you might go, no, I'm not going to do that.
They'll stop listening.
So why night vision was a wow moment for me. And how many of your listeners and you remember the very first time you looked through a telescope, having not a good telescope, not having had that view, perhaps of the moon, perhaps of Jupiter, perhaps of Saturn. And of course, my first time I ever saw Saturn, I said, wow, or something even more that we can't say over the radio. And I had the same view saying with Jupiter. And when I show people the moon from my telescope, when they walk by here, I try to do a little outreach. I have never had anyone not say, wow, when they looked through the telescope at the moon. That just doesn't happen. And just remember that view that happened to you when you see any of those new things. I've been in astronomy 10 years, and I put that night vision device in my telescope, and I looked up, and I said, wow. It was that new to me. It's just like having a whole new telescope. It makes my telescope bigger than it actually is, and it shows me objects with the right filtering that I never ever could have seen from my driveway, my light polluted driveway. I can see North America, I can see the Veil, I can see California, I can see Barnard's Loop, I can see the Heart and Soul Nebula, I can see things that aren't even in the sky, normal pocket sky atlas. And I can see hundreds of them during the summer Milky Way. Nighttime or wintertime isn't a good night view, at least here in the northern part of the world for night vision, except that it is galaxy season. It's not as good with galaxies, but it can let me see galaxies that I normally couldn't see. And so that's why I love night vision and what it does for me. And I hope people will go look for pictures of what night vision. They're not as good as EAA can get, but you have to wait for the EAA or photography images. And these are live. And you move the telescope, they move right out of the image, and you can scan the telescope around the sky. And as something else pops in, you go, oh, what's that? That's something I've never seen before.
So just so people know, EAA is the electronically assisted astronomy.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what the differences were really until we started communicating over email. I had tried electronically assisted astronomy before, and I know that some people really enjoy it and it can be good for outreach, but it didn't really work well for me because we had the device in the telescope and then we were sitting in lawn chairs looking at a little screen in the dark. And to me, it just didn't seem to work well for me. I'd rather either be looking through a telescope or like inside looking at live images streaming in. But that seemed to be kind of in the middle somewhere. So with night vision, though, you're right there looking in.
Yes, and that's what I like about it too.
Yeah,
it's just incredible to hear you talk, Dale. Again, thoughts are just rolling through my brain as we're speaking, and there's certainly a cost associated to this, which we'll get into. But as you mentioned, it makes your telescope larger in a way, by increasing its the sensitivity towards light. So that is
just interrupt you here. How
Sure.
much larger does it make it? People think it makes it about 2 times larger or even better.
Really,
So
that's incredible.
What if you watch on cloudy nights where there is a night vision forum out there, you'll see a lot of people have stopped using larger telescopes and just go to smaller refractors, but small but fast refractors to do this, because you have all the benefits of a large refractor or a large telescope in a small portable telescope.
Well, and the other thing that is like very intriguing is, you mentioned your site where you do your observing is a Bortle 7 or 8, and you can not only observe from a light polluted location, but you can observe during full moon, which it's incredible to me that it opens up those possibilities. Wow. I'm very amazed right now.
Right. It's almost like that mythical cloud filter we all want.
Yeah, that's exactly
No,
it.
it doesn't see through clouds, but
you almost
and also it's dependent on transparency. You have to have good transparency.
Okay, so if your skies are typically poor or not great transparency, this might not be the best option then, is what you're saying?
Yes, you have to wait for a good transparency night.
Okay.
And for instance, this summer, as we all are fighting the smoke across everywhere, I was, let's see, what was I looking at? Oh, I was looking up in Cygnus, and there's a thing that's called the Propeller Nebula by us night vision people, which looks like it's a hydrogen alpha emitting nebula that looks like someone took a picture of a rotating propeller with a digital camera that kind of bends the blades. And I was looking at that, and it's hard to find because it's not on most sky maps, star maps. And I finally got it, and there it was. And I was looking at it, and then I wanted to use a different eyepiece, put a different eyepiece on, and I couldn't find it again. And then I moved around and did some other things, and there it was again. And then I took my eye away from the telescope and I looked up, and there were clouds coming by. I didn't know it.
Oh wow, that's a great story. So I guess, Dale, what if I wanted to do this, go down this path and get into night vision astronomy? What would be on the checklist of gear that I would need to purchase?
Okay, well, you need the night vision device, and there are several ways to buy it. TeleVue sells one that you buy it and an adapter from them so that it'll attach to an eyepiece. You probably are going to need to buy a 55 millimeter TeleVue eyepiece. It doesn't have to be TeleVue, but you need something that the adapter will attach the device to. And that I found Explorer Scientific eyepieces of certain sizes work for that as well. And so you need that, and then you need filters. The filters are key, at least to seeing through light pollution. And it isn't just your ordinary hydrogen alpha filter. It needs to be a narrow band hydrogen alpha. And I hadn't heard of those before, but they come in like 7 nanometers wide, or 3.5 nanometers wide, or 12 nanometers wide. And for that then really makes a sharp, narrow filter to remove everything but that particular wavelength of light. And that is the middle of the wavelength of hydrogen alpha emission, hydrogen alpha nebulas. And in 2-inch size, those are in a couple $100 or more than that range. And since the pandemic, they've probably gone up and they've been harder to find. And night division devices themselves have been harder to find. Usually what night division devices that are sold were once owned by the Army, and they have been then recycled back from the Army. And then if there are a few companies that look at them and make sure they're appropriate for night vision, that they don't have a lot of black spots in them where the sensor doesn't work anymore, and that they have enough magnifying, and they have enough resolution for astronomy. There's a few companies around that know exactly what to look for and get you those specs. And it takes a little bit of time to get the night vision device. Usually, if you ordered one, they'll say, okay, when one comes through meeting those specs, we'll let you know. And that usually is, well, when I ordered mine 4 years ago, that took up to 6 weeks. And now I've heard it can take up to 6 months or more.
Wow.
But anyway, that device, and that's what you need. You need a few little adapters, and the night division device and an eyepiece. And that's the equipment you would need.
Sorry, Dale, what manufacturer made your devices? See, TeleVue makes these. There's a few different manufacturers. What one do you have?
Well, that's the funny thing. I don't actually know the manufacturer, but I know the company I bought it from. And I actually bought it from the same company that TeleVue buys theirs from. And to begin with, I went to TeleVue, but I wanted devices come in 2 types. One with a lens on the front that you can take off, and one with the lens on the front you can't take off. TeleVue sells the one with the lens you can't take off. And with that one, you can only use it 2 ways, handheld or in afocal. And I was talking on cloudy nights saying, I want to buy one. What do you recommend? And most people didn't recommend that type if you wanted all the options. And of course, I'm the kind of guy who likes all the options. In that case, it's called a Mod 3C. And the Mod 3 is a type of night vision device. And you'll find them when you go to any night vision device company. You'll find them listed. And I don't really know all the specs and why they call it that. But you want to find devices that they call them Generation 3. And that's the latest devices that have been sold for the last N number of years. I don't know how long N is, but it's 5 or 10 years. Generation 2 devices are useful, but not nearly as useful and have as much gain as Generation 3 devices. And then more than 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, there were Gen 1 devices, and people use those sometimes and go, well, it didn't do anything. Well, no, it's not. They're just not appropriate for it. So you want to try to find an Generation 3 device, but a Generation 2 device will be a couple $1,000s less than a Gen 3, but won't give you quite as good a stuff, but can give you some wow factor, I've heard. I haven't looked through any of those.
I'm just, we talked about this when we were messaging, because apparently, and people should know this, is that if you're buying them, you can't seem to buy them cross-border, but they do seem to be available in every country. Like, for example, I don't think I can order one from a company in the States, but just doing a quick Google, just with what you said here, I just looked up, just did a Google search, and here in Canada, right away, first hit was for a telescope store, strangely enough, that's selling something called a looks like a PVS 1451 Gen 3 in a various.
Yes. Yeah, PVS-7 and PVS-14s are all Gen 3 devices, I think.
Yep.
And mine isn't a PV. I think those numbers then mean what kind of housing is it in?
Okay.
And I haven't mentioned it, but most people call them monocles. You look for a monocle, but if you have deep pockets, you can get two for the price of two and put them together as a binoculars. And people rave about doing that, but I don't have those deep pockets.
Yeah.
Also, there's a company in Europe that sells them. And yes, I should go over the point that in the United States, we have laws that say you cannot export night vision devices. You can't take them out of the country, and people in the country can't sell them to people outside. Not only that, I'm not supposed to allow people who aren't U.S. citizens to look through them.
Oh, wow. So definitely some policies around this stuff that, anybody who's interested, I guess, needs to do some research to see how they do it, particularly if they're not located in the U.S., I would imagine.
And for the Europeans, there is a European company called Omni, OMNI, and they post on the Night Vision forum on cloudy nights, and you probably can find them online. And they make binocular versions and monocular versions of them. And I was even thinking about buying from them, but because of they're much more expensive than U.S. versions, but you can get them from them.
Okay.
Yeah, I did find somebody in Canada, and they had bought them from France. And then just doing a quick search here, I can find them in Canada. So yeah, it's just something to be aware of. You can get them in most countries, it seems. It looks like it's one of those devices. You have to buy it in the country of origin. There's lots of stuff in astronomy that's like that, I find, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So Dale, you mentioned filters, and I just wouldn't mind circling back to that. Is there a number of different manufacturers that make those narrowband H beta filters, or I guess which ones do you have, or which ones would you recommend if somebody was?
Yes, there are several companies, and there were more before the pandemic.
Oh, okay.
And then they became rare during the pandemic, because I suppose most of them were made in China or Taiwan or the likes. Lumicron used to make some, and I don't know that Lumicron still is in business. I can't remember. I don't pay attention to brand names,
Mm-hmm.
but I remember that some vendor has gone out of business making them. But Bader makes them. Mostly the astrophotography guys know about them.
Okay.
But in general, 2-inch ones, except for all the hydrogen alpha ones. I think it's called Antilla, Antila, or something like that. I'm sorry, I just don't remember names real well.
Yeah, no problem.
And brand names. But that's what my 3.5 wide filter is. And that one really works well on the Barnard's loop. In that picture that I have, that I'm sure you'll put up on your site, that was using the 3.5 nanometer wide filter. That one just makes all the stars disappear, but it can really help penetrate through the light pollution and make the vision a little bit higher contrast. But there are times when it doesn't work well, and actually that's when the transparency isn't quite so good. And I switch back to the 7 nanometer wide filter. And there's two filters you want. You want something for hydrogen alpha and something to just get rid of the light pollution and let the stars shine through. And to let the stars shine through, you use a long pass infrared filter, the long pass at 685 nanometers long pass filter. And several companies make those, and you can find them on the net. When you put that on, the light pollution goes away. And that's what one summer when I was out of my driveway and I put that in and was looking handheld, I was looking off to the south, trying to see stuff in Sagittarius, but I have to walk all the way out into the street to look over my house to see that. And I walked all the way out, and I was looking up through that and went, oh crap, there's clouds coming through. And then I took the night vision device down and said, no, there aren't clouds. Oh, that's the Milky Way. And that's how good the night vision device is. Have you ever been
Wow.
out at a dark site when you haven't been for a long time and you look up and go, it's early evening and you look up and go, oh crap, clouds are coming by. And then you realize once again, oh, nope, that's Milky Way. I haven't seen it in a long time.
That's amazing.
Very cool. So I have a couple questions. And again, earlier you mentioned going out when the moon is full. So to ask, what happens if you look at the moon or the planets with this device? And are there some objects like wide field extended objects sound good? What about clusters, galaxies, and anything like that, planetary nebula, that sort of thing?
So the device is really good in hydrogen alpha and some planetary nebula, but they have to be planetary nebula that are emitting in hydrogen alpha or just normal starlight. It's more sensitive in the infrared side, although it's not sensitive to low infrared. It's still up high in the infrared end, but it doesn't see blue at all. And so it's just terrible for reflection nebulas. You won't see them at all. If you try to put it on the owl, for instance, it can't see that. It has trouble with the Dumbbell Nebula, and actually has real hard time with the Ring Nebula even. But part of this is because I'm putting it on my low resolution telescope. I'm only using my telescope most of the time at 13 power. Trying to see the ring at 13 power is a little difficult, almost doesn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
Then you asked about the moon. Anytime the moon was been about 10 degrees of it, you start seeing a huge bright blur, and it just you can't see anything through the telescope through the night vision device. There's also another interesting thing. I have a filter slide that I can put in, and so you really like to switch between filters because when you put the hydrogen alpha filter in, almost every one of the stars disappears. And so if you're trying to star hop with an hydrogen alpha filter, it's almost impossible. You need to go back to the long pass 685 nanometer filter for that. So anyway, I had a filter slide in on my 16 f5 telescope. And as I said, I have lights all around my house. Not my house, but my neighbors and the like. In fact, an astronomer that works at the U of M is right across my driveway, and he loves to keep all of his lights on. He's a radio astronomer, and his wife is afraid of the dark.
Oh no!
I've become friends with him, and I live with it, and he's given me permission to go unscrew his lights when I'm out viewing or throw towels over them, which is what I do. Anyway, I had the telescope out, and I was trying to see something to the south, and I just couldn't see it. There's this haze glow over the telescope, and I realized it's the infrared coming off those lights, bouncing onto the filter and into my night vision. And so you've got to close down all the infrared that might be bouncing around. Oh, also, I have a big bright infrared light out in my backyard that I like to use the night vision to light up the bunnies and the foxes as they come through. So the night vision device is useful for other things, and that's how I got my wife interested in it. She loves to look at all the devices, all the animals out in the backyard at night.
Oh,
and
wow.
So that's one thing is, honey, I want to buy this, and it's good for seeing animals at night. Anyway,
I can make good use of that.
I have this huge infrared light, and I couldn't figure out why all the wires were glowing in the darkness. And I realized it was my infrared light bouncing off of them and the night vision picking that up. I turned that off, and all of a sudden I could now see the lagoon and the eagle and the like from my backyard, handheld with my night vision device.
What about like open and globular clusters?
Yeah, they really shine for open clusters. It can find those really dim ones. For instance, one of my favorites is Caroline's Rose up in Cassiopeia.
Yeah.
And it's really great at Okie Tech Star Party, where it's bright and my 10f5 just at high power just fills the lens with this glorious, I call it the giant cinnamon roll because of all the dark lanes you can see in it.
Wow.
Well, I wanted to try to see it here. And without night vision, you cannot see it. And so the last few years I've been experiencing trying to find it. And last year, yes, I can find it with the night vision and the long pass filter. I can actually see it. It's very tiny because at 13 power, it is a tiny object, but I can see it where you could not see it before. I've also taken my telescope to Bortle 4 site, and Caroline's Rose was just beautiful at 13 power with all the little tiny stars in it. And I'm looking forward to doing that again this year. And so on star clusters, when I just scan across the sky and you scan across from, say, Cygnus to Cassiopeia, you just find one after another and you go, wow, which one is that? And then you have to go look it up. They are just amazing. I can see star clusters that generally don't have names, that just have those NGC numbers. I find them now.
Oh, that's great.
And then globular clusters, you can actually, in my light pollution, I can see M13 and I can resolve the inner stars with it, with night vision, where I could not without it.
Wow. Dale,
at least with using my 16-inch telescope.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You mentioned
on star clusters and open clusters, and then on galaxies. I didn't talk about it. A lot of people say it's not good for galaxies. Well, it's not as good for galaxies, but imagine from a Bortle 7 to Bortle 8 sky, looking up at Virgo and trying to see the Markarian chain. I can see almost all the stars in the Markarian chain in my 10f3 scope. And the Leo triplet becomes the Leo quartet when you use 2-degree night vision. There's two very dim magnitude 9, I think they are, or magnitude 8.5 galaxies off to the side of the Leo triplet. And I can see all of those with night vision.
Wow. So Dale, you kind of, I was going to ask a question and you sort of answered it, and it was around galaxies, because earlier you mentioned that sometimes galaxies are not the best for night vision. Is part of that just because of the low magnification you're using, or is there other factors?
Yes, but also galaxies don't emit a lot of hydrogen alpha. So you'll see the hydrogen alpha regions, but you won't see all the blue reflection nebulas that we have. You'll also see the light from their stars, but you only see the light of the ones that aren't so blue. And by the way, when you have the long pass filter on, red carbon stars just really glow. They glow a lot brighter than their normal magnitudes. And so they confuse you a little bit when you're looking at star charts, thinking that, gee, that one looks as bright as a Mag 3 star, but it's not. It's just a red carbon star.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
The other thing I need to mention, though, is if you've ever tried to do star hopping from your backyard with like a 10-inch scope, that can be pretty hard. You're looking at the pocket sky atlas, and you can only see 10% of those stars, and so it makes it hard to figure out which 10%. When I put that night vision device in, I see every one of the stars in the pocket sky atlas, and the view looks just like they show. And so I've learned to star hop so much easier.
So Dale, I got a question. Notice that you've got this 10-inch f3 scope. In the stuff I was reading online, seems like some people are using like Boren-Simon f2.8s, or some people even have tried using comet catchers like you and I have. What's the advantage of using such a fast telescope for night vision astronomy versus, say, something like a more traditional f5 or f6 scope?
Yeah, starting at f5, there starts to be not enough light even when you put those filters on. Now, it probably works real well at a dark site where you don't need the filters. But in light pollution, you've got to put those filters on, and then it turns out even f5 is starting to get a little bit too slow to see. Just for instance, with my 10F3, the deepest magnitude star I can see is about a 7.5 to mag 8.
Okay.
And I don't know, but I know you mentioned that f2.8 telescope, but I don't know what it is and how and why it works. And then you mentioned this comet catcher, and I went, oh, yes, you know what? I should try that. The problem with the comet catcher is that sliding focuser on mine probably can't handle that long stack. As well as I don't have anything to get my night vision down to a 1 1/4 inch focuser. I'm always using it at 2 inch.
I rebuilt mine so it has a helical focuser that can take eyepieces.
That was the only thing about the comet catcher that got me. Eventually, that focuser just doesn't stay set very well.
Yeah.
And actually, after it sat in the basement for 10 years, I noticed there was a film inside the corrector that I had to take it out and take the film off. Then I also noticed that the main mirror is not as good as it should be anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it helped me do the urban list.
Well, so my other question is exit pupil. You're talking about using a 55 millimeter Teleview Plossl on an f3 telescope. Now, that's typically something people won't do because you get this huge exit pupil. And when we were emailing back and forth, you sort of explained a little bit more of the theory behind that. And I wonder if you could just kind of touch on that briefly in our last few minutes here.
Right, sure. If I try to look through that eyepiece visually and it's light out, my eye pupil is maybe 5 millimeters in diameter. I've forgotten what a dark adapted eye is 5 to 7 millimeters in diameter, and the exit pupil on that f5 would be something like 20 millimeters in diameter. However, the entrance pupil of the night vision device itself is 20 millimeters, so it can see everything in the telescope and look around the diagonal, and so you don't see it. And that's a nice feature of the night vision device, is then I can get my telescope down into a really low power ice telescope and have it be really wide field. I think its field of view is about 3 degrees, and that's rather amazing to think.
Wow.
Seeing in a 10-inch telescope, seeing the moon is just being part of your view instead of the full view.
Yeah.
In fact, when we had the last lunar eclipse, I actually, with the night vision device, I could see the eclipse of the star. I've forgotten what star it was at the time, but I saw the moon eclipse it using the night vision, which I couldn't see with binoculars because the moon was so bright.
Yeah.
But now it had gotten so dim during the eclipse, it wasn't too bright for the night vision. And it was kind of interesting to see that star become eclipsed.
Very cool. Those are my last questions. Shane, do you have anything else to add?
No questions. I'll just comment, and this has been fascinating to me, Dale. I've learned an awful lot about night vision. I was intrigued before we had this conversation, and now I'm going to a couple levels higher than intrigued, whatever that might be. I think
we never actually did get to the price.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
How about we finish there? Yeah.
So before the pandemic, I don't know what it is now, but before the pandemic, it cost me about $4,500 for the whole complete kit, $4,500 to $5,000. When I had to buy the lens, I had to buy the night vision. I even had to buy a lens to go on the front of the night vision. We talked about the Mod C3 having, it has a C-mount on the lens, and you put C-mount lenses on the front of it. Actually, we didn't even talk about that part of it. I can then put Nikon old 35 millimeter Nikon manual lenses on the end of it, and I put like a 50 millimeter lens on the end. And since the night vision has a 25 millimeter eyepiece, I now get a 2-power telescope. I can put a 100 millimeter lens on, which I do quite frequently, Nikon lens, 100 millimeter f1.3, I think it is, and they can be had pretty cheaply because they're not popular for the digital side. But there were millions of them made, and there's millions of them still around and on eBay. You can get them for like about $50, and they will take with an adapter. You can put a 2mm filter on the front, and that's basically how I use it handheld. That gives me a about a 3 power telescope with something like 20 or 10mm. I keep forgetting what the field of view is. But with that view, I can see Vail in North America and the crescent all in the same field of view when I'm hand holding at my driveway looking up at the sky.
Wow, that's incredible. So about $4,500 is what
Yes.
you paid to get set up. So likely a little bit more, like you mentioned, due to
Now, if
availability.
you're really penny pinching, you can build your own from your own selected tube. All of that can be cheaper. You can do it yourself. I haven't tried to do that. I decided I had more money than I had time. And since I'm retired and not spending all my money, I decided to buy some toys.
Nice. Yeah,
I love it.
Here in Canada, they started about $3,500 and run up to about $8,000. So, and there's a huge variety of options and that sort of thing. I'm guessing some probably work better for this sort of stuff than others. So people are going to have to do their own digging, I think.
Right. I priced out the European binoculars, and it was close to about $9,000 I would have to spend.
Very good. Well, Dale, do you have any other? That was great. Thanks for hopping in and giving us the pricing. We nearly forgot.
No, I can't think of any. And I dropped down. I used to have my email up here where it would remind me, but I don't have it up anymore. I think we've hit everything. I'm not sure we did enough to convince people, but I hope so. Really, we're talking about seeing things, and we really need pictures of those things. And that's why I did send you quite a few. I have a whole bunch more others I could send, but in reality, Mike Lockwood's site has even better pictures. Most of my pictures, I didn't really make a point of it, is vision is even better than those pictures most all the time. Sometimes the pictures are brighter because it had a 2-second exposure compared to what your eye sees, but the detail is much better from your eye. Your brain takes away quite a few things and you see more. There are people on the cloudy nights who really look for the most perfect vision, perfect device they can find. And so you'll find lots and lots of talks about what's the best one to buy and is this spec good or is that spec good. In reality, as U.S. citizens, we're not even allowed to post the specs.
Oh, wow.
And so we have to be kind of cagey about what the specs are for the device.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for educating us in this today, Dale. I certainly found it fascinating as somebody who loves wide field and large nebulae. This seems like a device right up my alley. I hadn't
even paid attention to large field. I used to kind of hate it. I wanted to see the stars in M13 in great detail. And then I heard something about the Heart and Soul Nebula, and I looked to see them on the map and said, no, that's too big for my telescope, and I can't see it in my telescope. And then I got night vision, and I was actually scanning up from the double cluster, and I came across this stuff, and I went, what the heck is that? And then I realized, oh, it's the soul. Oh, it's the heart. I can see it all now.
Wow.
Very
and
good.
Those were 2 or 3 degree stuff.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thanks so much for sharing all this with us today, Dale. We certainly appreciate it. And at this time, we'll conclude. I'll thank our listeners for listening. And Dale does have a YouTube channel. You can find him at DaleEason on YouTube. He also has some of his software up on GitHub, and is on the Cloudy Nights Night Vision Astronomy and Telescope Making forums. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks to everybody who's listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.